Our first question, please, from Sheila West.
Benefit cheats are rightly condemned by hard-working, honest people. Why should MPs' behaviour regarding their expenses be viewed differently?
Margaret Beckett, you've been fingered a bit by the Telegraph for your... You had a grace and favour house paid by the taxpayer. You rented out the London flat. You claimed a second home allowance, $72,000 over 4 years. Is that the same as being a benefit cheat?
Well, no, because contrary to popular belief, and I don't blame people for believing this, because the way it's written up is always how this is always how it sounds. People who have grace and favour residences don't live there free of charge. They don't pay what you might call the official rent, which is about 100 grand or something, and which is paid from one government department to another, because, of course, these properties are owned by the taxpayer, but you do pay. And people don't think you do, so, of course, they think it's analogous. And if that's... and, of course, the Telegraph knows that perfectly well, but doesn't choose... and I don't single them out for that. Nobody ever chooses to replace it. But Theresa is right, that this is a system that's grown up over many years. It has many flaws, and it has to be changed. And that is, if you recall, something the Prime Minister proposed quite some considerable time ago, and which he has pursued. And I'm glad that now it appears that everybody agrees that we have to have change. He's already commissioned Sir Christopher Kelly and his commission to look at the matter. We've asked them to work as speedily as they can, consistent with doing a proper, thorough job. And
the question is about benefit cheats, though. We might come to the future, but the specific question from Sheila West is: benefit cheats are condemned by honest people. Why should MPs' behaviour be viewed differently? And you say the Telegraph and Ben Brogan have got it all wrong. Let me just bring in Ben Brogan.
With respect, I did not say that.
You said he misunderstood.
No, I said you specifically mentioned the issue of grace and favour residences. And I said that I think most of the national newspapers do actually know what the position is, but they don't report it, and the Telegraph's no different in that.
Ben Brogan.
I think we've regularly reported that there are certain realities about the grace and favour residences, that, for example, you have to pay a benefit in kind when you stay in one. But I think, to go back to Sheila's original question about benefit cheats, the fact is that the answer is yes, there is a clear similarity between benefit cheats and what some MPs have been accused of. The problem is that the system currently operating at Westminster does not allow us to take the kind of action against MPs that ordinary people who might find themselves on the wrong end of the law if it comes to cheating on benefits would have to experience. And therefore, part of the challenge facing us as a country and as a public and at Westminster is: how do you find ways of holding MPs to account when their own system is so grey and so fluid that there doesn't appear to be a way of getting them?
Okay. A lot of people... A lot of people with their hands up. I will come to you in just a moment, but let's finish round the panel here, because Ming Campbell, you also were fingered by the Telegraph, and then yesterday announced you were going to repay nearly £1,500. Why are you repaying it if it was right to claim it, or were you wrong in the first place?
Well, it requires explanation, but I had still have a one-room rented flat in a block of flats near to the House of Commons. I've had that since 1989. I don't own any property, I have no mortgage, I have no interest in the property market in London. But in 2006 it became clear to me, since nothing had been done in this flat for 17 years, that it was no longer adequate. And that was particularly because, whereas in the past I'd spent 2 or 3 nights a week there, having become the leader of the Liberal Democrats, I was there 6 and sometimes 7 nights a week, and my wife had to come quite often because there were things we were expected to do together. And so it seemed to me right to try and resolve this, and I had 2 choices. I could either abandon the flat and go elsewhere and pay much more, substantially more, or have some renovations done. And I asked someone who knew about these things to help me.
But my question is, why did you pay money back? What you've described so far is that what everybody knows is the second home thing. Oh, could you come to it then?
I'm coming to that, indeed. And the reason I'm coming to that is this, that when all of these invoices and things were produced to us in the course of the last 2 or 3 weeks, when I looked back at what I'd done, it seemed clear to me that asking this person to help had been for my convenience more than anything else, and that in those circumstances it wasn't justifiable to expect public funds to bear the responsibility for that.
Why did it take you all that time to work that out? Didn't you think that... Sorry to interrupt you. Didn't you think that at the time when you put the claim in?
And that is why I paid the money back. At the time, which was 2006, then public perceptions about these things were quite different. And I had, of course, submitted... I submitted estimates to the fees office. I take full responsibility. Be clear about this. I take full responsibility for my own decision. But it seemed to me, having seen these invoices again, that this was not a proper charge on public funds, and that's why I paid it back.
Okay. And since you have now this acute sense of what is proper, do you think it's right that MPs should be able to claim for food in London? You claimed £800 for food over 2 months?
Yeah.
Is it right that MPs should... I mean, we all have to eat, and you can't eat twice.
Well,
you can't eat in your home, in your secondary...
Yes, it is right if this is additional expense occasioned by being in London necessarily on parliamentary duties. That, I think, is perfectly reasonable. Otherwise, there will be people, perhaps with large families, who would find themselves... That doesn't happen in my case, but with large families, who might find themselves very substantially financially embarrassed. But the test has got to be, is this directly related to your parliamentary responsibilities? And if I may say so, what we now need is a wholly independent system, independent upon salary, independent upon pension, independent upon expenses, what is legitimate, the amounts, the validation, all of that has now got to be taken away from the House of Commons and put out independently, because, as I think others have suggested, we have reached a tipping point at which, in order to restore confidence, we have to take very much more radical steps and measures than we've done in the past.
We'll come to that in a moment. We're dealing with the moment with the situation as it is. Steve Easterbrook, I mean, an MP could do well on McDonald's on 100 quid a week. What do you make of the behaviour? Do you think...
I think what's unfolded in front of us over the last couple of weeks, quite frankly, is nothing short of a national disgrace. And I think as a taxpayer, it makes me... I simply cannot believe that any organisation can have such sloppy controls over cash handling. But I think in amongst some of the murky detail, the piece that I continually struggle with more than any other is why it is taking so long to fix it. Because there are thousands of businesses up and down this country that have perfectly viable expense codes that protects the employer and protects the employee, is based on the premise, I would understand, certainly in our business, that no one should profit from expenses. And just on a few commonalities, in my view, it would be so straightforward just to fix the issue right at the very core of where it's at. We need transparency. We need absolute clarity. There should be no wiggle room whatsoever in an expense code. And we also... We also need clear structure around the disciplinary code for anyone who abuses it, and then it needs to be independently audited.
OK. The woman in pink there on the right. Sit down. You don't need to get up to speak. Sit down.
I'm just very angry, that's all, Mr Dimbleby. Mrs Beckett, are you going to pay back the £72,000 that you've taken after your mealy-mouthed answer trying to explain yourself? And Mr Campbell, how the hell do you get through £800 a month on food?
Not £800 a month.
Hold on, Margaret Beckett first, I think, and you can... Margaret Beckett.
No, I'm not, because, as I pointed out a moment ago, well, one of the difficulties with this issue is that I completely understand that people can't understand why MPs make the claims that they do. And there are two reasons for that. One of them is because it's not appreciated that MPs do have extra costs that people, even in comparable jobs, do not have. And the second reason is because no one is allowed to explain. Now, you called my explanation mealy-mouthed. It's quite simple and straightforward. If you live in a grace and favour residence, you have 3 sets of housing costs, one of which you pay out of your own salary like anybody else does. That's the position I was in, and that's why, no. If I'm found, when there's this independent inquiry, if there's some question about something that I've paid, then of course I will deal with it in the way anyone else would. But I don't think they will make that judgment.